Don't talk, just listen. The words whispered in English loaded with Filipino accent made official Sarah Martinez freeze instantly. She had just left the car when that squalid figure leaning against the brick wall caught her eye. At first glance, it just looked like one of the invisible of the city. Dirty clothes, beard to do, long hair and tangled dripping from the fine drizzle. But his eyes burned with an urgency that cut the night like a blade. Beside him, a loyal mutt growled low, staring at the alley shadows. "Behind you," he whispered again, pointing discreetly. "He's waiting. I saw him follow you from the police station." Sarah felt every muscle of the body retest. At 29, with 6 years of police, he had developed sharp instincts for danger, and at that moment they all shouted on maximum alert. His hand hesitated over the gun as he studied the man in front of him. Miguel Santos was not an ordinary homeless man. Under the dirt and the rags, his posture revealed something different. He didn't staggering like someone intoxicated. He didn't look shamely. There was a silent dignity in his movements, a sharp intelligence that brutally contrasted with his deteriorated appearance. What Sarah didn't know was that Miguel had spent the last 2 years watching those streets with the accuracy of a data analyst. Former software member in Manila, a legal immigrant who lost everything after an unfair deportation based on documents forged by his own American boss, he had developed a network of information that the police would live itself. "He has a knife," Miguel murmured, his eyes never leaving the shadows. "And it's not an ordinary robbery. I heard him on the phone. He knows you by name. Sarah Martinez, badge 4471. Sarah felt a shiver traveling her spine. Last week, he had received threatening anonymous messages after arresting Marcus Whitmore Jr., son of an influential local businessman, for drug trafficking. He had thought they were only empty intimidation of a spoiled boy. "How do you know my name?" she whispered, keeping her voice low. Miguel discreetly pointed to his cell phone in his hand, a surprisingly modern device for someone in his situation. "I intercepted his messages. 6 calls today, all about you. They planned it for days." Miguel's dog growled louder, his ears standing. It was then that a figure moved in the dark of the alley, the metallic glow capturing the weak light of the pole. Sarah backed up instinctively, her hand going to the gun. "Trust me," said Miguel, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had already faced much worse storms. "When I say now, you run to the left and bend down." There, in the face of this impossible situation, Sarah had to make a decision that would change her life forever. Trusting a complete stranger that society had taught to ignore, or follow protocols that could not be enough against an enemy who knew every movement of his. What Sarah couldn't imagine was that apparently unintended Philippine had enough information to overthrow a corruption chain that stretched from the streets to the highest ranks of the local elite, and it would all start with a simple act of confidence in darkness. The previous week, Miguel had intercepted conversations that would reveal a much larger plot than a simple act of personal revenge. Marcus's father, Richard Whitmore, was not just a respected businessman. He commanded a money laundering scheme that used forged deportations to silence immigrants who discovered too much about their operations. Miguel knew this because he himself had been one of the victims. 2 years earlier, as an IT engineer at Whitmore, he had discovered irregularities in financial systems. In a matter of weeks, documents mysteriously appeared, questioning his migratory situation, and he was deported based on papers he had never seen. If you want to find out how an unjustly deported engineer has turned his life into the streets into a surveillance operation that would rival the FBI, and how a moment of mutual courage would become the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried, be sure to subscribe to this story until the end. "Now!" he shouted Miguel, and Sarah threw herself to the left, just as a blade cut the air where her head was seconds before. The attacker, wearing a black hood, staggered by, making a scam, but quickly recomposed himself for a second attack. Sarah rolled through the wet floor, pulling her gun, but Miguel was already in motion. With surprising agility for someone who had lived on the streets for 2 years, he settled between Sarah and the aggressor, using a metal stick that kept hide-go in their rags. "You shouldn't have gotten into it, filthy Filipino," growled the attacker, revealing a clearly American accent. "The Whitmore family doesn't forget who hinders business." Sarah felt her blood freezing. The Whitmore family controlled half of the city's real estate developments, and Richard Whitmore Mr. was known for their generous donations for political campaigns. Now everything made sense. Her son Marcus was not in jail by chance. Miguel deflected from another knife blow with precise movements, as if he had military training. "Sarah, record everything," he shouted, blocking an attack. "Your cell phone. Record now." While filming with trembling hands, Sarah watched Miguel fight a technique that she had definitely not learned on the streets. Each movement was calculated, economical, efficient. Who was this man really? The striker began to lose his breath. "You don't know who you are moving, your bitch. Old Whitmore has contacts everywhere, police, judges, even in the immigration department. I know exactly who I'm moving with, Miguel answered calmly, applying an arm key that left the aggressor immobilized. The question is, do you know who are moving with? Sarah raised the attacker, still processing what she had just witnessed. In recent weeks, 3 other police officers investigating the Whitmore family had been transferred or promoted to distant police stations. Now she understood why. How did you know about it? She asked Miguel as they waited for the reinforcement. Miguel looked at her with those intelligent eyes that contrasted with their deteriorated appearance. Because they did this to me first. 2 years ago, I found out how they wash money through fraudulent U contracts. A week later, immigration agents appeared at my door with documents I had never seen. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Forged documents, perfectly forged, signed, stamped, with retroactive dates. In a matter of 48 hours, I was on a backplane to Manila, even though I had all my papers in order. Miguel adjusted his dog's collar, who had remained in guard throughout the fight. It took me 6 months to get back illegally. What Sarah didn't know was that Miguel had spent these 6 months in the Philippines doing much more than just trying to return to the United States. Using his knowledge in technology, he had created a network of contacts that included ethical hackers, investigative journalists, and even FBI agents specializing in international financial crimes. Why did you come back? Sarah asked, genuinely curiously. Because they destroyed my life thinking I was going to give up, Miguel answered, his eyes shining with a determination she had never seen in a homeless man. But what they didn't know is that a Philippine never gives up a fair struggle. When the reinforcement arrived, Sarah noticed something strange. Sergeant Williams, who coordinated the operation, seemed uncomfortable to see Miguel. More than that, it seemed nervous. Official Martinez, I need to talk to you in particular, Williams said, pulling her away. What's that, indigent said exactly? He asked, nervously looking at Miguel. Sarah felt something move on her stomach. In 5 years working with Williams, he had never seen him so agitated. Why the question, Sergeant? Just answer, Martinez. It was then that Sarah realized something that made her question everything she thought know about her own department. Williams wore a Rolex watch that cost more than his annual salary. For a sergeant with 3 children and an unemployed wife, it made no sense. When they returned to the group, the attacker had been removed by the ambulance after mysteriously dropped and hit his head. Williams explained that they were common accidents during violent prisoners. Miguel watched everything in silence, his eyes registering every detail, every expression, every lies told. Sarah realized that he was memorizing everything with the accuracy of someone who knew the value of the information very well. Official Martinez, Williams said with a forced smile, I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining certain information, reserved, for the security of all involved. Sarah nodded automatically, but felt the weight of Miguel's gaze on her. It was as if he could see through the unspoken words, the silent agreements, the corruption that hid behind golden badges. Of course, Sergeant. Reserved information, she replied, realizing the bitter taste for the first time those words left in her mouth. Each new discovery only strengthened something within Miguel that its oppressors could not see, a silent determination being fed by the corruption itself that tries to hide. What these people did not know was that each act of arrogance was building their own fall, brick, and that an unjustly deported engineer had returned with much more sophisticated tools than they could ever imagine. In the days following the attack, Sarah was constantly watching Miguel through the city streets. Each time he found him, he was more intrigued by his contradictions. A homeless man who spoke 4 languages, knew immigration laws better than many lawyers, and had a cell phone with encryption applications she didn't even know existed. You're not an ordinary engineer, are you? Sarah asked during one of her night meetings, offering him a hot coffee. Miguel smiled for the first time since they met. In the Philippines, I worked on cybersecurity projects for the government, systems that track international money laundering. He caressed his dog, who had gotten used to Sarah's presence. Richard Whitmore chose the wrong person to deport. What Sarah didn't know was that during her 6 months of forced absence, Miguel had done much more than just back illegally. Using contacts at Manila's Financial Crimes Department, he had mapped the entire Whitmore ghost companies, tracked bank transfers to tax havens, and identified at least 12 other victims of fraudulent deportations. I show something, Miguel said, pulling a laptop hidden in an impermeable backpack. I needed someone inside the police to confirm my suspicions. The screen showed a complex diagram of financial connections that did the investigative work of the police station to seem amateur. Names, dates, values, bank accounts, all meticulously documented and verified. Sergeant Williams has received $50,000 in advisory payments from Whitmore in the last 2 years. Miguel has pointed to a series of transactions, always a week before cases involving immigrants are archived or transferred. Sarah felt her stomach turn. How did you get this information? When you have enough time and motivation, and you know the right people, it's surprising what you can find out. Miguel clicked on another tab. Want to see something really interesting? The new screen showed intercepted communication records, text messages, emails, even recordings of telephone calls. Sarah recognized some voices. Williams, Judge Morrison had denied immigration resources, even Mayor Peterson. This is enough evidence to overthrow the city's half-government, Sarah murmured incredulously. Exactly, but evidence obtained illegally is worth nothing in court. Miguel closed the laptop calmly. That's why I need you, Sarah. I need someone who can get this same information through legal means. Sarah realized that she was being recruited for something much bigger than she had imagined. What exactly is it proposing? An operation to expose the whole network, but it needs to seem that the police discovered everything on their own. Miguel looked straight into his eyes. Are you willing to risk your career to do the right thing? It was then that Sarah received a call that would change everything. He was his smaller sister, Elena, law student at local university, crying desperately. Sarah, they accused me of plagiarism. They say I stole another student's research on unfair deportations. Elena sobbed on the phone. They'll expel me from the university. Sarah's blood froze. What research, Elena? It was about cases of immigrants who were deported with forged documents. I found a standard, a company always involved in the cases, Whitmore Industries. Miguel heard the conversation, and his eyes narrowed. They are attacking their family now, he said softly. That's how they operate. First they intimidate, then destroy those we love. Sarah felt anger she had never experienced before. It was one thing to attack her, but messing with Elena was to cross a line that had no return. What do we need to do? First, your sister needs cool protection. I know someone. Miguel typed quickly on his cell phone. Second, we accelerate our plan. They showed that they have no limits. In a matter of hours, Miguel had mobilized a network of contacts that impressed Sarah. A civil rights lawyer arrived at university to defend Elena. An investigative journalist began to verify information on academic retaliation standards. A forensic accountant began to analyze the university's financing. How did you organize all this so quickly? Sarah asked, watching the operation unfolds. 2 years on the streets have taught me that the true powerful in the city are not the ones that appear in the newspapers, Miguel replied. They are the ones who work in the shadows, helping who really needs it. That night, while working together organizing evidence and strategies, Sarah realized that she was participating in something that transcended personal justice. It was a war against a system that believed to be able to destroy lives' impunity. Miguel's plan had 3 phases: documenting, validating, and exposing. But what even Sarah could not imagine was that apparently defeated Philippine had spent 2 years building not only evidence, but a network of revenge so sophisticated that it would make the Whitmore family question every decision they have made in the last 5 years. For a moment, when Miguel looked at the city's lights in the distance, Sarah saw no longer a homeless man, but a strategist who had turned his humiliation into a precise weapon, and the war was just beginning. The next morning brought something no one in the city expected, a press conference called by the FBI. Miguel had spent the whole night ending details with his federal contacts, and now watched from afar while Sarah positioned himself next to the agents. Today we announce Operation Golden Bridge, said Federal Agent Lisa Chen, a 2-year investigation that revealed a corruption scheme involving fraudulent deportations, money laundering, and bribery of civil servants. Richard Whitmore, Mr. watched his office, initially confident. After all, his connections have always protected him, but when they began to show the evidence on the screen, his face began to lose his color. Through international cooperation with Philippine authorities, continued the agent, we obtained access to bank records that showed transfers of $2.3 million to offshore accounts, coinciding with 47 cases of documents based on documents later considered fraudulent. Miguel watched through the coffee window while the Whitmore empire was beginning to crumble live on television. Each document shown, each transaction exposed, each name revealed was part of the puzzle he had meticulously set up in the last 2 years. Sarah knew she was participating in something historical. The evidence that Miguel had collected illegally served as a map for parallel legal investigations. Each track had been verified through official methods, each test confirmed by competent authorities. Sergeant Williams was arrested at his residence this morning, announced Agent Chen. The charges include receipt of bribes, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy for fraudulent deportation. Williams had tried to escape, but found $127,000 in kind hidden in their basement, exactly where Miguel had predicted that they would be. Bank transfers tracked by the feds confirmed each penny. Richard Whitmore. Mr. called desperately to his lawyers but discovered something devastating. His law firms were also being investigated for complicity in the scheme. The phones played in the void. Secretaries said the partners were unavailable. Judge Morrison voluntarily resigned after being confronted with evidence of his participation, continued the press conference. Documents legally obtained through federal warrants show that he received donations for non-existent campaigns. Miguel felt a satisfaction he had not experienced for years. Each person who had contributed to his unjust deportation now faced the consequences of his actions. But true justice was just beginning. Elena, Sarah's sister, appeared at the university accompanied by the lawyer that Miguel had provided. In a matter of hours, accusations of plagiarism were withdrawn, and an internal investigation revealed external pressures on the disciplinary committee. Whitmore Industries had its assets frozen, announced Agent Chen. As we investigated the use of corporate funds for criminal activities, we estimate damage to over $50 million in fraudulent government contracts. Richard Whitmore Jr., Marcus, watched the prison while his father's company shares plummeted 78% in a single morning. Investors fled as rats of a sinking ship, taking decades of family empire building. Sarah noted Miguel approaching the police station for the first time since it all started. He was no longer hidden in the shadows. He walked erect, with dignity, the dog proudly by his side. "You did that," she said when he got close enough. "We did it," Miguel corrected. "You were the one who made it possible to get the evidence legally. Without you, I would only have information that could not be used in court." The most satisfactory moment came when Richard Whitmore, Mr., was arrested live in front of his corporate towers. The handcuffs clicked with the same definitive sound that Miguel had heard when he was illegally detained for deportation 2 years before. "You don't know who you're moving," shouted Whitmore as he was placed in the police car. "I have contacts in Washington. I will sue you all." But his threats sounded empty. His contacts had been distanced at the moment the scandal came public. Politicians who once answered their calls now didn't even answer messages. Agent Chen made the final announcement. This operation resulted in the release and legal reintegration of 34 immigrants unfairly deported, including Miguel Santos, whose work as informant was fundamental to the success of this investigation. Miguel could not contain the tears when he heard his name being publicly cleaned. 2 years of humiliation, cold, hunger, and despair had become a complete and cool vindication. Sarah observed the complete transformation of the man who had saved his life. No longer a homeless man ignored by society, but someone publicly recognized as a hero by the FBI itself. What neither Sarah nor the federal agents knew was that Miguel had kept a last surprise, evidence that connected the Whitmore scheme to an international trafficking network that would turn that local operation to the tip of the iceberg of something much larger. Revenge was complete, but justice was just beginning to be served. 6 months later, the transformation in Miguel's life was impressive. The federal government not only cleaned its name, but offered an official position as a cybersecurity consultant to the Immigration Department. His first project would be to develop systems to prevent exactly the kind of fraud he had suffered himself. Sarah watched from the audience while Miguel spoke to a civil rights conference. Wearing a simple but worthy suit, he spoke with the authority of those who transformed suffering into wisdom. "True revenge is not to destroy your enemies," he told the more than 500 participants. "It is building something bigger than they could ever take down." Richard Whitmore, Mr. assisted from the federal prison, where he had a 15-year sentence for corruption, conspiracy, and fraud. His assets were confiscated, his company failed, and former political allies refused even to mention his name. Marcus Jr. had been deported to Mexico after losing American citizenship due to family involvement in federal crimes. Elena Martinez had become one of the country's leading student activists, leading immigrant rights protection movements. His research, initially suppressed, was published in several academic magazines and cited in legislative reforms. Sergeant Williams had lost not only his job but also his family. His wife asked divorce to find out the extent of his corruption, and his children refused to visit him in prison. His $50,000 in bribes barely covered the legal costs of his defense. Miguel established a foundation to help immigrants victims of fraudulent deportation. In just 6 months, it had already gathered evidence to reverse 23 similar cases to yours. Each victory was dedicated not only to the victims, but to the memory of all who were not fortunate to survive the corrupt system. "You changed the whole city," Sarah said when they met after the conference. "We changed," Miguel corrected, holding his hand. Their relationship had naturally flourished, built on mutual respect and shared goals. "You risked your career for a stranger. It talks more about your character than anything I could have done alone." The police department underwent a complete reform. New protocols were implemented, internal investigations became mandatory, and collaboration with immigrant communities increased dramatically. Sarah was promoted to detective, leading a unit specializing in hate and corruption crimes. Miguel bought a modest house near the city center, but kept the connections with the homeless community. Every weekend, he and Sarah distributed food and offered free legal guidance. Her dog, Max, had become a kind of local mascot, always happy to see people who recognized from the streets. True satisfaction came when former colleagues of the company Whitmore sought Miguel to offer jobs. Completing companies wanted to hire the man who had exposed the largest corruption scheme in the city, but Miguel chose to follow a different way, use his experience to protect others like him. "Do you know what is ironic?" Miguel said during a television interview. Richard Whitmore believed that deporting a poor Philippine would solve his problems. In fact, he created his worst nightmare, someone with enough time, motivation, and technical knowledge to destroy everything he built illegally. Miguel's story inspired documentaries, articles, and even a proposal movie. Universities invited him to lectures, and human rights organizations honored him internationally, but he kept his feet on the ground, always remembering the cold nights sleeping in alleys. Sarah looked at the man who had saved her life and realized that they had actually saved each other. She had found purpose beyond protocol fulfillment, and he rediscovered that his life had invaluable value. On the first anniversary of the fall of the Whitmore Empire, Miguel and Sarah walked the same streets where it all started. The alley where he lived now housed a support center for immigrants they had opened together. "Have you ever regretted anything?" Sarah asked. Miguel looked at the city's lights, then to the woman beside him, and finally to Max, who was happy beside them. "Just one thing," he answered with a smile, not believing earlier that it valued the penalty to fight. The best revenge was not to destroy Richard Whitmore. It was to build such a significant life that it made all humiliation seem insignificant. Michael learned that true power does not come from overthrowing enemies, but from lifting something they could never understand, an existence based on justice, dignity, and genuine love. And you? Have you been through a situation where you needed to choose between bitterness and transformation? Michael's life teaches us that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply to refuse to be broken. If this story has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true strength is born exactly where they try to make us believe that we are weaker.